Okay, morning.
Good morning. This is Michael Gray with Office of Legislative Counsel. I'm here today to talk about a proposed amendment to H 494, the bill making appropriations for purpose of state government, aka the big bill. You may recall you discussed adding language to a proposed administration program that would have provided financial assistance to agricultural businesses, specifically meat, produce, and maple. And you had wanted specific language to be added into the big bill for the one-time appropriation of money to the agency for those grants. From my discussion with Representative Tolino, he had the language that you had proposed, but because of timing and the need to get the bill out, and because he had not discussed the language with the full committee, he asked that you propose the language as a standalone amendment because he didn't have time to get the Appropriations Committee's full approval of inclusion of the language in the big bill as it came out of committee. So that is why the language is being offered today or drafted today as an amendment. The language that is up on the screen is not exactly right because in the appropriation amount that is in H 494 is $5 million, not 8.85. So other than that, the language is correct. It would say in fiscal year 2024, $5 million is appropriated to the Agency of Agriculture to fund agriculture development grants for meat, produce, and maple processing. Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Markets shall determine that there are significant interests in establishing certain parameters in the grant program before making an award. Grants should be awarded to farmers, processors, and businesses which shall not include hydroponic operations. Furthermore, the secretary shall not allocate more than 25% of grant funds toward the maple industry.
So, I'll just say that this is essentially the language that we had put in the letter, or reflects the intent of the committee, the discussions at the time. Representative Levitt?
Oh, I was just wondering, do we need to just put a dollar amount, or is it okay to just say more than 25% of grant funds? Or should we put a specific dollar amount on there?
Well, if there's going to be the $5 million appropriation, and you can't provide more than 25% of that, so 1.25.
So it works as is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Representative Templeman.
There was one other thing that we had discussed, and then later you and I brought this to a conversation regarding small and medium-sized businesses. And I think that was a hard thing to define in our conversation. So I guess we dropped that completely.
Well, it's easy to determine small farm versus medium farm versus large farm.
But not business.
But not for an agricultural business. Like, what is a small processor versus a large processor? What's a small slaughterhouse versus a large slaughterhouse? There is no distinction in statute on that. So I don't know. Do you direct the agency to come up with criteria? You've already directed them to come up with parameters for the grant program.
Yeah.
So I think you could do it. It might take more time to do that, to get to a place where you're happy with how to define a large business versus a small business. Honestly, a small business is defined by the U.S. I'm not going to get the rate. It's 500 employees or less.
Yeah, which is like every business in Vermont.
Right.
So I came up with a solution that might address that in a roundabout sort of way. When the agency was talking about this, they said each grant would cap at 200,000. Perhaps since the amount has been cut in half, we can cut the grant size in half and direct them not to release more than $100,000 per recipient. Any,
I like that.
I'm trying to remember hearing the $200,000 and whether that was how hard and fast that even was. But, okay, let me think about that. Representative Graham.
So my understanding on the intent of this 10 million, which is now 5 million, was to provide grant funding for smaller operations that weren't able to receive any in previous grants. And now we want to limit certain industries from not receiving grants. I really have a problem with the reduction for maple industry. I mean, that is growing industry in the country. And at the moment, I mean, there may be a day where it won't be, but right now it is. And I just think that the intent of the 10 million was for all these meat, produce, maple. It just discriminate, limit one sector and not limit the other.
I think, as I recall, the reason we reduced maple is because it's the one industry that you just listed off that's actually doing really well, as opposed to the other ones that are more, they're struggling more. I remember that's the conversation that we had
So
in committee.
So the big maple operations receive working land grants to upgrade their equipment. The smaller producers did not, were not able to receive grants to upgrade their systems or value added. I mean,
I'm just saying this is what we agreed on in committee, but could be wrong.
Representative Rice.
I would just add that the other things that we heard were that there was just a grant program stood up for maple producers. Representative Supranat had the details of that. And also that the produce and meat processing were the things that were sort of discussed more by the commission, and then maple seemed to be sort of checked down. And so it wasn't to say, no, let's toss maple out of this altogether. It was just to sort of put guardrails on to say this whole amount of money shouldn't go to the maple industry.
okay, do what you guys want to do.
What was
And
that?
I won't do what I want to do.
Just trying to recall our conversations.
Yeah, I think to your suggestion, I'd be a little hesitant, Dave, too, at this point, without taking more testimony and better understanding what that might, how that might limit the kinds of projects that might be, yeah. Recognizing that, yeah, okay, we are dealing now with a smaller amount of money, and that does raise the question of, do we want to try and aid as many people with less money, or, yeah, but that would just be my concern there.
do you know why it dropped from 8.8 to 5?
I think broadly speaking, it's because there's more demand for the money
Elsewhere.
in other areas.
Of course.
Yeah. Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, David, with all due respect, when you take something like meat processing, $100,000, like buy a pickup truck today, and if we're actually trying to fill these bottlenecks and make a difference, I think putting that restriction that low may inhibit actually making gains in some of those areas.
To address that, the only reason why I thought it would still be an effective amount was because we did take testimony from the fellow who came up with this modular system.
For interesting.
And that was like $120,000 project. So it kind of still fits into that small scale. You're right, on a larger processor, a pickup truck's worth.
It's enough to buy a couple of coolers though.
Right.
So,
Sounds like we can't change it anyway, so.
Representative O'Brien?
Mike, is there a definition of processing at the agency or in this bill? Just because like sort of where production ends and processing begins, I can see, because we've narrowed it to just if the processing goes with meat and produce, then
Right.
it's in the.
So there isn't, and it's because it's used kind of as a general term across industries. When you go into the specific chapters, some of the specific chapters, for example, for a slaughter, they use the term process for the breakdown of the animal. But in this context, it's used more generally, basically the taking out the raw product and transforming it into something else.
But potentially a farmer who doesn't sort of end processing would not be eligible, or sort of post-processing retail wholesale world would not be eligible too, right?
Yeah, it's going to depend on the application and the criteria that the agency determines for these. I think they'll be able to make it flexible enough that even in that instance, you can be able to apply for something for your process of manufacturing that product.
Okay.
So it occurs to me that understanding now, being reminded by you, Mike, that we don't have possession of the bill and it won't be a committee bill, it'll be a individual bill. We don't need to have a vote on it. We do need to, though, get names onto it. So if you want to just let me know, individually, if you want your name on it. Understanding that we have different perspectives and opinions on at least that one piece. But I think that other than the dollar amount, it more or less reflects what we had asked, what we had put in the letter, what the committee had decided to put in the letter. Good. Any other questions just before we switch?
So this whole paragraph got left off?
I think the budget, so if you pulled up I'm sure the budget is sitting there somewhere that we can look at right now, and it's.
Yeah, this is H494.
Yeah.
And this is the section on one-time appropriations. It is a very long section this year. And so you're in subsection G of the one-time appropriations, and you're subdivision 6 in that.
So subdivision 6, this is a strikeout. Subdivision 6 currently says something.
Subdivision 6 says, in fiscal year 2024, the amount of $5 million is appropriated from the general fund to the Agency of Agriculture for the Commission on the Future of Agricultural Economic Development Grant Program. Funds will be used to provide dedicated, competitively awarded grant funding for small and mid-sized agricultural producers and value-added processors in the meat, produce, and maple sectors as recommended by the Governor's Commission on the Future of Agriculture. Amount not to exceed $125,000 may be used to support the cost of temporary employees to administer the grants.
Striking that language, which came over and that came from the original budget proposal. Mike?
So this still says 8.85.
Yeah, so
Yes.
we'll get a draft.
It's supposed to be, I got language yesterday that had 8.85 in it, but the budget has 5 million in it. So just have to reconcile.
So we'll get the next draft of that, and that will be what goes into the clerk's office.
And if you want to let me know whose names should go on it, because I have to put them on
Okay.
as well.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. All right, we'll wrap up